This is Leadership Today. Here's your host, Andrew Beveridge.
Well, it is my pleasure to introduce Shane Hatton. He's author of the book, Lead the Room, Communicate a Message That Counts in Moments That Matter. I was just saying to Shane, it's getting a little worn around the edges, my copy, because it's one of the few business books I've read through twice and dipped into numerous times. So highly recommend it. Shane works with individuals and teams around themes of leadership, communication, influencing, but also culture as well. And we'll talk about that as we go through. He's a really gifted communicator. He's able to bring, I think, great advice and practical ideas. But what I really valued in his book was the frameworks and just ways of clarifying perhaps things that I'd thought about but couldn't quite articulate in a clear way. He's a great speaker, but also brilliant as a mentor and coach. He's got some great programs that are individual focused, but also working with groups of other leaders as well, which we'll talk about a bit later. But what impresses me most is his ability to work and apply things to anywhere between first-time leaders through to CEOs. So there's plenty in there to grab and run with as well. So Shane, it's great to have you along today.
Andrew, that is probably one of the nicest introductions I've ever had from somebody coming onto a podcast.
Oh,
and
there we go.
What I would say thank you for is thank you for reading the book, because, so much goes into writing and thinking and preparing. And then you think to yourself, does anyone read this? Like, I know lots of people buy it, but I'm like, do people read it? So when you hear that people read it and it's helpful, I think it's just one of the nicest compliments. So thank you.
Oh, that's my pleasure. You got to. I won't ruin the plot twist right at the end.
I can't tell you who dies in it.
Yeah, well, it was a shock. You didn't really leave it open to a sequel. So talk us through the premise for the book. This idea of leading the room. I think as I picked that up initially, I was thinking maybe this is going to be focused at kind of upfront presentations and things, but that's definitely part of what's covered. But there's a great deal of other things in there as well. So what does it mean as you think about leading the room? How do you describe that?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I started writing it, and I remember showing my manuscript to my wife, and I said, I've written this book. It's all about communication. And she said to me, Shane, you've got to stop calling it a book on communication because it's actually a book on leadership. And yes, communication is an element of it, but really it's a book that centers around the way that leaders communicate, and it leans more to the leadership angle for it. I think where it started is, I've been a speaker for over a decade, and often at times during the time of like implementing and practicing and doing something over and over again, it becomes kind of second nature to you. You don't really think a lot about, how do I do what I do? How do I actually think? How do I prepare? How do I capture my ideas and how do I communicate them? And so when I started my practice about 5 years ago, I thought, okay, great. I'm going to go out. I'm going to help people to be better presenters. And to be honest, it drained the life out of me talking about presentations, because I realized that what I was doing for the last decade wasn't presenting. It was leading people from a platform in a way that mobilizes them around ideas or messages. And so I went, okay, so there must be something more than just teaching people how to deliver a great presentation. So I kind of have this almost this escalating way that I communicate and teach people, which is, I think if at a core level, what we really need is that sense of verbal communication, which is I need to know how to communicate with you. And then if we kind of take it to the next level up, we talk about public speaking skills. It's like, well, I need to learn how to be a better public speaker. And it's really just about how do I have a conversation with you, but with a lot more people in the room. And then I think there's that next level where most people and organizations go, we need to bring someone in to help with our presentation skills. And they bring them in because most of the time their leaders are just boring. And so they go, we need them to be more inspiring and we need them to be more captivating. And so we come in and we teach them all the techniques. We teach them how to project their voice. We teach them how to overcome fear, all those kinds of things that are relevant in presentation skills. And then you find yourself, maybe you're an executive leader, a senior leader, and you realize that, people don't want me. They're not just looking for me to be inspiring. They're actually looking for me to lead them through all kinds of situations, whether it's navigating change, or whether it's uncertainty, whether it's times like now in the midst of a global pandemic. They look to leaders to lead them. And so presentation skills was teaching people to be inspiring. But what I wanted to do is teach leaders how to mobilize their people. And that's kind of where Lead the Room came from.
Yeah, fantastic. And interesting, because I was working with a group yesterday and talking about influence, and people were almost or equating inspiring and charismatic as the same thing. And it was interesting just kind of talking through that and how you can be inspiring without being charismatic. And so in the book, you talk about moments that matter. And every day it's likely that we have a couple of those moments that matter. A lot of them are happening online at the moment, not just physically in rooms. And so I think what strikes us is those meetings and presentations. As a leader, I might go, right, I need to prepare for that and get my stuff together. But there's all these other incidental moments that just happen. So it's a phone call out of the blue or the, being invited into something else or a discussion that we didn't expect. How might we prepare for those unexpected moments?
It's interesting. If there was a spoiler for the book, it would be the spoiler is that there are no unimportant moments to speak. Because most of the time we think about the really public facing or the really big opportunities, right? So maybe you're a senior leader and you've got a town hall and you've got your all staff getting together and you go, okay, this is a really important moment. Maybe it's, you've got a big presentation that you're presenting to the board, or maybe you're presenting to your executive leadership team if you're new to leadership and it feels really big for you. James C. Humes was an American presidential speechwriter, and he has this great phrase, and I use it in every one of my sessions. And he said, every opportunity you have to speak is an opportunity to lead. And it's really that thought that every time you step up to speak, it's a chance to lead people and mobilize people. And so whether that's online through Zoom or Teams or whatever online platform you're using, whether it's a phone call when you're having conversations with people, whether it's just a weekly stand-up meeting, every opportunity you have is a chance to lead people. So in terms of preparing for those moments, I think right now we're seeing a really big challenge in the world that we're living in, where we're feeling overwhelmed by information. We're just getting so much. I mean, if you go back really early into kind of the pandemic days, we were getting updates from our senior leaders daily. It's maybe spaced out a little bit more now, but the information is feeling so overwhelming. So people are feeling information overwhelmed. They're feeling probably hyper connected in the sense that we have easier ways to connect with people than ever before. Not necessarily feeling connected, but they're ways in which we can connect. We've got Teams, we've got online platforms, we've got all of our intranets, we've got all of our staff portals. We've got so many different ways to connect. And then at the same time, people are feeling a little bit overwhelmed. And so they're also feeling a sense of, okay, well, I don't know if what I'm feeling right now is normal, because generally when we're working in the office with people, we have other people to kind of bounce off and compare with. But now most of us are working in a home office and go, well, is what I'm feeling okay? And so I think what people really need right now is, number one, they need really a really clear message. They need things to be really simple and clear and say, hey, this is what I need you to know. Without all the overwhelm, without all the excess information, really succinct messaging that says, hey, this is what I need you to know right now. The second thing they need is they need to feel validated in what they're feeling right now. And for leaders, what's more important than ever before is to really tap into empathy and understand people's problems that they're experiencing and be able to address them, even if you can't solve them, just to be acknowledging them in moments like now, so that people go, okay, I get that you understand how I feel. And then finally, I think it's really important to be clear on, what do people need to do with this information? Like, they really need that practical next step. So right now, I'm encouraging leaders in the times that we're in to be really clear, going, this is what you need to know. I can understand this is how you feel, and I want to show you that I understand how you feel. Now, this is what we're going to do. And the do doesn't have to be something revolutionary or transformational. It just needs to be their next step forward. I think if we can just go in with those three things, I think it'll be super helpful for people.
Yeah, great points. And I think that, so having that clarity around where we're headed is one of those, obviously, those core things that motivates people. I think it's been interesting through this time that some leaders have probably backed away from goals because they go, oh, it's unusual times. And so they get rid of that goal. And so that can make people feel even less purposeful in their work. It's driven by the right, desire to help people, but it actually does the opposite. But it's interesting as you're listing that off, and I'm not sure if others would have a similar reaction. Sometimes when we list these things off, so I've got to create this purpose, I've got to kind of connect with my people, help them to think about those next steps. And I felt this as I was reading the book. There's a lot in there that I felt personally challenged by my own leadership, and some of these things can be hard to change, right? They take investment of time and energy and effort. So how do you, and maybe it's thinking in your own experience as well, how do you keep going in your leadership development? Because there's moments where it just feel like it's enough, right? I've kind of, surely I've done enough, but the best leaders just keep going. What is it, do you think, that's the key to that, continuing to strive and move forward in our leadership?
I think it's probably a balance or an intersection between both humility and teachability. I think those two things are accelerators for growth. And I don't think they're things that you give up or you progress from. I think they're things that are deeply embedded to people who are the most remarkable leaders. So if you look at people who, we look up to as people who are deeply inspiring leaders, it's almost like they continually keep coming out with things. I mean, I think of someone like, John Maxwell. He's known all over the world as like one of these, just legends in leadership. And almost every day there's something new coming out of him. He's put out ridiculous amount of books and there's always new content coming out. And I don't think you can put out that kind of content unless you're continually growing and learning and developing. And I reckon this balance of humility and teachability, humility for me is it's being humble enough to recognize that you don't have all the answers. And that pursuit of being able to learn and grow comes out of that sense of humility. But also the balance of teachability means that you're willing to actually take on board some of those things and being able to apply and actually use some of those things. So it's not just the humbleness to recognize that I need to grow, but it's also proactively going out and seeking that growth and that learning and taking it on board and using it. So I think they're huge leadership accelerators.
Yes, which is interesting because that humility and teachability, I guess if we think about what people often think about as strong leadership, it's like confident and right. So, I'm absolutely right. I don't question it. And I'm 100% confident in my views, which ironically can put people off because there's not that connection and there's not that ability to grow. So how do you combine that humility and confidence, because it seems like a difficult thing to bring the two, where it may feel a little bit weak, for want of a better word, to be humble and learning and not having the right, not needing to have the right answers all the time. Have you got thoughts around how to combine those two?
Yeah, I love it, because I think we often put humility and confidence as though they're either opposite ends of a spectrum. And I actually think the best leaders are humbly confident. And I think you can have both at the same time in equal measure. I think if you were to kind of imagine that they sit on this kind of, they say like a quadrant model, right? And you've got humility running down one side, you've got confidence running down the other. I think where we get caught up is we go too far down confidence or we go too far down humility, and we do one without the other. And I think if we think about people who go down the confidence scale and they lack humility, what we see is arrogance. It's they're really confident, but they lack humility and they just come across arrogant. And because of that, we go, I don't want to be arrogant. And so we go down the humility train. And then what ends up happening is we're deeply humble, but we lack confidence. And so we're not arrogant. We're just invisible. Like we don't put ourselves out there. We don't put ourselves out the front as a leader, and people are looking for us to lead. And so we have this kind of anonymity that exists around us. So it's either, most of our mind is either, I can either be arrogant or anonymous. I have no in between. And I actually think influence sits at the intersection of both humility and confidence, because it's not about me, which is the humility factor. And it's also, I believe that I have something to contribute to the world and to our team and to our people, which is the confidence. And so I think the best influence comes when we recognize that we can be both humble and confident at the same time.
Yeah, which I think is challenging to a lot of people's, because I think, again, reading through the book, part of what it does is it challenges your mindset around what effective leadership looks like. Because as we said at the outset, it can be easy to think about effective leadership is those upfront moments. And I think we've all had experiences of that. I remember sitting with a CEO once who I thought was reasonably impressive. And during this conversation, he was in the States, he was talking about one of his big challenges as he was talking to a small group of people over lunch was how he was going to buy enough furniture for his third house on a lake. And it was just one of these conversations that you could see everyone else was just going, I actually can't relate to that experience. It's one of those bizarre moments where you're sitting there going, I can see that's really tough for you to get enough furniture for that enormous third house. But anyway, I digress.
But it's all those little conversations, right? Like I remember having a conversation with the CEO, and he was so intentional. Every single day he would walk into his office and he had to pass by the reception desk in order to get to the elevator to go to the floor where his office was. And he said, I would go in every day and I would watch people walk past the reception desk, go straight to the elevators and completely ignore the person at the desk. And he said, and I made it so intentional that every single day I show up to my office, I walk over, I say hello, I say good morning, and I connect. Now, that's a seemingly insignificant moment. But what's the difference between when a person gets up on the stage to present to their entire team and the CEO is saying, hey, we want to create a friendly, optimistic, positive environment, but the receptionist is sitting there every day going, yeah, but you've ignored me every single day that you've walked through. Like little moments like that we can neglect, but they actually can be undermining us whenever we have to stand up and actually take the stage in those really important moments.
Yeah, and it definitely speaks to culture, right? So culture is in those moments as much as in the big moments. It's not the big strategic plan. It's the small conversations. And a bank I worked for, CEO there was incredibly impressive, and they had an executive lift that went from an executive car park up to the executive floor in the building, so they could actually go every day without meeting any normal employee, and he would make an effort to get out at the ground floor and actually ride the lift with everyone else up to the level. And it's one of these things that everyone knew about, and chances were at some point you'd be in the elevator with the CEO for 5 minutes. And it was just a really, again, that confidence and humility to interact with people. And yeah, really impressive. So with I guess as we're working with people, there's always that diversity of needs. And, as we think about influence, part of it is trying to meet those varying needs that people would have, or varying interests that people would have. So how do you actually cater for that diversity as you're trying to address or work with a range of people, or across a range of levels, as you just described as well?
Yeah. I mean, every room that you go into will have a different group of people with a different set of problems. And one of the things that I'm consistently trying to work with leaders to better understand is that no two presentations, if we call it that, or the delivery of a message to different people will be the same. And often what we do is we put a lot of effort into crafting a presentation, and then we take that presentation and we present it to everybody as this generic presentation because we put so much effort into it. And we forget that the people in the room have very different responses, attitudes, beliefs to the content that we're delivering. And I mean, to get a more of a practical example, I think about something like maybe you're going through significant organizational change. And if you were to take the idea of organizational change and talk to your executive team about it, what they might say is, this is really exciting. This is preparing us for the future. We can't wait to share this with people. If you present it to your board, they might say, yep, this is really helpful to our financials. This is going to be a really good decision. We obviously need to be really conscious about how this is going to impact us in the short term. If we took it to your frontline staff, they might say, I'm terrified I'm going to lose my job. If we took it to your middle managers, they might say, I have no idea how I'm going to communicate this. I'm the one that's going to cop the brunt of this. If you took it to your more senior managers, they might say, I'm not sure where I fit in this picture. The same message delivered to multiple different audiences has a very different response and a very different impact. Now, 9 times out of 10, your messaging can stay the same, but probably one of the most important things is to be really clear on who am I delivering this to, and start with intent before we start with content. And for me, that's probably one of the most crucial keys to all of this is, what's the intention that I have for the audience that's in the room? And then how do I build the content to support that? So the general question I get people to reflect on before the start of every kind of key message that they need to deliver is, by the end of this, what do I want people to think, feel, know, or do? More specifically, the people in this room. What do I want them to think at the end of this? What do I need them to know? How do I want them to feel? Or what do I want them to do by the end of this? And that answer to that question is going to look very different based on who you're talking to.
Yeah, now that emotion part's probably something that people often overlook. And I think, again, for leaders, that can feel quite uncomfortable. So we're asking leaders, or maybe I think we are asking our leaders to take on more of that interest in things like well-being, for example. And it can just feel like there's more and more piled onto people's plates. So that ability to kind of connect with people on an emotional level, but keep the right line there, I guess, of not taking on people's issues or taking on the weight. So if I've got a team of, say, 10 or 15 people that I'm overseeing, if I'm trying to carry all of their burdens, I'm going to collapse, right? Yeah. So what's your thoughts around how leaders can be empathetic, connected, humble, but not just carrying the weight of all those issues that they might come up in those teams.
My experience for most people has been that people don't need you to have felt their emotions or to have solved their problems. More often than not, they just need you to acknowledge them. They need you to appreciate that it's like that for them. I was having a really interesting conversation with Holly Ransom recently. Remarkable woman and leader, and she's interviewed some of the most incredible people around the world. And she was sharing an experience that she had with one of her mentors, where he rolled a dice on the desk in front of him and basically said, "What do you see?" And she said, "Well, I see a 1." And he said, "Well, I see, a 6." And he said, "Well, who's right?" And in one way, he said, "Well, we're both right." And he said, the lesson in it was that just because your perspective of what you see is right doesn't mean it's the only perspective in the room. And I really loved that idea of what could we do to acknowledge another person's perspective, even if we don't agree with it? How do we acknowledge that it's challenging for someone without necessarily even being upset about it ourselves or being pulled into the emotion of it ourselves? We can still acknowledge that it's troubling for them. And I think more often than not, what I've found helpful for addressing some of those conversations is just to really be upfront with the person and say, I'm really sorry this is how you're feeling. I'm really sorry this has been your experience. And just try to position ourselves on the other side of the desk and go, if I was in their shoes and I was looking at what they see, how might they be feeling? And one of the things I talk about in the book a lot is around identifying what I describe as boardroom and bedroom problems. And the boardroom and bedroom problems are essentially, what are the problems we feel confident talking about in an open environment? And the bedroom are the problems. What are the things that keep us up at night? And I think if we go into every conversation and every presentation with this idea of, what do you think people feel confident talking about right now? If we go back to the change example, well, they might say, I'm a little unsure of how this change affects me. I'm, maybe not sure whether or not my role is going to change. They might feel comfortable saying that. Well, what's the unspoken conversation in that room? What's going to keep them up at night? Well, it's, what if I lose my job? I've got a family to look after. Or what if I lose my job and I lose my house? I've worked so hard for this. Or what if I can't find another job? And so my job is not to sit there and go, oh, that's so horrible. I feel so awful. My job as a leader is just to go, hey, I acknowledge and I recognize that when we share conversations around change, it might bring up some uncertainty around your job or what that looks like. And to be honest, it impacts your life as well as your work. And so we want to be really clear about how we can help walk you through that. Just that acknowledgement and that empathy goes a mile when it comes to helping connect with people.
Yeah, for sure. And I think trying to lead people when they're afraid is incredibly tough. And it's amazing how many times when there is a big change or a shift in organizations, people immediately go to, what does this mean for my job or my employment? I think that's a natural response. But the leaders presenting that message, that's probably way down the list of things that would be potentially on their mind as they're presenting that. So I think that empathy, that ability to appreciate what might this feel like on the receiving end, it's very hard to do that without having the conversations, right? Because you're guessing in the dark otherwise, I guess. Yeah, you would just reach out to it. And again, if we were to flip that the other way around, we might say, let's say we're presenting to a board. And I've had this example before where we go, okay, what are some of the unspoken conversations in the room versus the spoken? Well, the spoken ones are, we're considering, how's this going to impact culture? How's this going to impact our bottom line? What's our, what's our legal requirements? What's our governance requirements around this? They're all really open and honest conversations, but what's the unspoken conversation in the room? Maybe it's that, is this person trying to undermine me that's sitting next to me? Like, am I trying to prove my worth to this board? Am I here? Like, is this going to impact my legacy? Why did I join this board? And so when you go into the room and you go, hey, what I really need from you is money. And they go, well, the conversation's not about money. The conversation's about legacy. And we're actually trying to request money, but we need to be speaking to legacy. Or for example, I said to someone recently, like if you go into the meeting and you say, here's our idea, here's our pitch, and they don't quite understand it, do you think a person who's sitting in the room knowing that the person beside them is gunning for their job or trying to undermine them, do you think that person's going to say, hey, excuse me, I don't quite understand what you're saying here? Yeah. Well, they're probably not. What they will say is, hey, you haven't made this clear enough to understand. You haven't done your job properly. Go away and do some more research and come back to us. And so you can walk away thinking that you've missed the mark, but really it was an unspoken conversation that wasn't addressed. Yeah, it's great. And it's that thing of, any of those big ticket presentations you're doing, you almost want it really clear how it's going to play out before you even get into the room on the day.
Yeah.
So with so many people working remotely, we discussed that briefly earlier. And I think one of the challenges there is that the teams that we're leading are rarely in the same place at the same time. And that's going to continue. And I think when you work out the likelihood, even if people go to 2 to 3 days a week, the likelihood of having all of your team in the same place at the same time, if you just allow that to play out, is actually incredibly small. So, and through this time, you've, I guess, had to transition your business or the way that you deliver that into a virtual context as well. And there's probably some clues in there. But what are your thoughts around leading in a virtual context? So where we don't have everyone in the same room at the same time, it seems to me it makes a lot of this, quite a bit more challenging. Are there any thoughts or tips that you would have for leaders in making it work in that format?
Yeah, I mean, one of the good things that the last probably 18 months has brought in for people is that it's forced many of our senior leaders to the front lines of our organizations. I was speaking to someone in quite a large, significant organization in Australia, and they said they did their engagement scores right in the middle of 2020, which is kind of like really peak, like confusion, disruption. And they said they scored the highest in their engagement scores that they've ever had. And I said, okay, so what do you think that was about? How do you think, how did that come about? And they said the biggest feedback that we got from people was that our senior leaders were more visible and more present than they've ever been before. And when you think about that, when you are in really disruptive and turbulent times, what do you want? You want someone to lead you. I often think about it. It's that example of, I'm not a great flyer. I'm a really bad flyer generally. And it's like whenever I hit turbulence or whenever things feel like they're disruptive to what they are usually doing, the immediate thing I'm doing is I'm waiting for the captain to just come over the speaker and go, hey, everyone, we're just obviously going through some turbulence. Everything's perfectly normal. It's okay. Or to go, hey, we've had, some concerns, or we're going to be circling back. We're going to have some delays right now. And it's almost like as soon as that kind of a voice comes over the speaker, I'm like, oh, okay. I know that they're in control. I know that they're taking charge. What really terrifies me is when we're hitting all these bumps and just the seatbelt sign comes on and then there's just silence. Because I'm like, I'm interpreting everything in those moments. Yep. And so I think probably right now more than ever, what has been so important is that leaders become really visible to their people. And Zoom and Teams and online platforms has made that so easy for us to be able to do. And so showing up regularly and showing your face, moving away from just sending all staff emails and actually sending videos. You've seen so many CEOs and senior leaders been doing that more often. And I'm loving that because what you're seeing is you're seeing their home, you're seeing them, their face, you're seeing their personality. And I think little things like that, where we show our face, we show our personality in moments like this are just so important and so valuable.
Yeah. And I think that realness as well, like I was reflecting on it was pre-pandemic, I think there was that kind of that well-known YouTube clip of the person being interviewed by CNN and their kids start appearing in the back of the room. And it was like this, shocking, isn't this hilarious just how disastrous this is? And now it's not uncommon even for people to be doing TV interviews and a child or a dog or a cat or something wanders into the background and we don't even really notice it. So that connection on a personal level, I could see how some people would be terrified by that though. But it is so impactful to go, that's a real person that's struggling with figuring out a video camera just like I am, or, that's got a life outside of work as well. So yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah. I met a duck in one of the Zooms. So there's a lady up in Queensland who has ducks, and the duck jumped up onto her lap during Zoom. Like I've met pets, I've met partners, I've met kids. And I just think it humanizes so much of our experience. Because I think if you think about most of our life, we try to segment, this is my work life, this is my home life. And now our two worlds have collided and they've blurred. And I think what we're starting to realize is that we are complete human beings, and we don't get to just leave a part of us behind when we go to work. We show up and we're there. And this has just made things a little bit more human, which I kind of like.
Yeah. I think you were still working on a book title for your next book. I Met a Duck. It's got to be up there. It's probably completely unrelated to the content, but I'm sure you could make it fly. Well,
everyone keeps asking me to lead the Zoom, and I'm not sure if I'm ready for that just yet.
There may be some trademark issues too, but that's okay. So we can feel like, and I think, to that point again, in a virtual context, one of the things that leaders have mentioned is, and I guess working with leaders pre a lot of this remote work, they felt like they were running from meeting to meeting, but at least they were running in between, right? They had the 10 to 15 minutes run in between. Now it's not uncommon to go, well, click off and straight back on. And I'm sure it's probably similar in the work you do. The number of people that are in like a minute or two into a meeting and they're just looking a bit phased already before we've even started is pretty frequent. So how do leaders escape that busyness, that kind of, thing to thing to thing, and it feels like it's all happening at us rather than having that sense of control?
Yeah, I mean, it's the age-old kind of response to that at a more generic level, which is you don't find time, you make time. You're just not going to get more hours in the day. You're not going to find margins in your calendar. I like Microsoft brought out some research this year talking about how much our meeting, how long meetings are going in terms of online meetings. And it's no surprise people are in more meetings than ever before. And they're launching features, simple things like whenever you schedule a meeting, it automatically blocks off 15 minutes either side of that meeting as a buffer for you. And I love that. I have that as a general practice anyway, which is whenever I know I have a Zoom meeting, you can't book a meeting with me 15 minutes after, like before 15 minutes after, because it's just, I need the margin to kind of digest everything that we've talked about in that meeting before. More of at a practical level, the thing that I think is also influencing this is that our meetings, because everyone's coming in from meeting to meeting, everyone's rushing in, most meetings are starting 5 minutes, 7 minutes after they're supposed to start. And generally people sit around having that awkward, uncomfortable small talk at the start of a conversation, at the start of a meeting while they're waiting for people to arrive. And by doing that, what we do is we reward people essentially for coming late and we wait for them. And like in what other context would we wait for people to start that meeting? And so a good friend of mine, Chad Littlefield, who's in the US, he essentially does a great series of videos around helping people to engage better online. And he has this great concept that he calls the unofficial start, which is basically the moment your meeting starts, you start with something that builds connection, builds engagement, has some fun. I do it all the time. I ask a question generally. So it might be, what's the strangest food you've ever tried? What's the strangest belief you had as a child? What's one thing that's made you laugh in the last week? And I start as soon as the first person comes into that meeting having that conversation. So when the second person arrives, they intercept a conversation that's existing already. And then I add to the conversation as people arrive. So by the time it's 5 minutes in, it's intentional connection and it's not wasted time. And then everyone who arrives late goes, what did I miss? What did I wasn't here when it started. What was the question? What are we answering? And they feel in some ways they've missed out, but they can also be a part of it. And I just think being really intentional with when we start means that people arrive on time going forward and feel like it's actually meaningful rather than rewarding people who come late.
Yeah. And it's that culture that you're building, isn't it? And I think outside of virtual contexts, we can all relate to that experience. There's definitely organizations I've worked with where you need to be there the expectation is that you're there a few minutes early and you're absolutely ready to go. And there's others where it's people are wandering in 8 minutes late and instantly opening up laptops and literally typing. People are receiving emails within the room during a meeting. It's just this kind of weird thing of we're having like a 30% efficient meeting, which now needs to go at least three times longer, which doesn't work for anyone. And it's one of the other things, I guess, is on most of our calendar software, it just kind of defaults to an hour. It's like, well, what's the likelihood that a meeting actually needs to go for an hour? Yeah, it seems pretty limited, right? So I've seen some people setting like 42-minute meetings and 23-minute meetings and stuff, and it does grab your attention a little bit more.
Yeah, my general philosophy is how can I schedule more time than I need and finish earlier than I planned? Because I always think to myself, okay, if I need 30 minutes to have this conversation, I'm going to schedule a 45-minute meeting and make sure it's available and blocked out so people have that space. But if I can finish that in 20 minutes, I'm all over that because it means people walk away going, oh, great, that finished 20 minutes early. I've got a buffer, because people just are not good at scheduling their own buffers. And so even if I do have a 45-minute meeting, I'm always going to try and finish 5-10 minutes early just so I give people that space to be able to do that.
Yeah. You describe yourself as a charismatic introvert, which is a intriguing combination of terms, right? And a lot of the work that you do requires it's extroverted in its nature, right? It's kind of speaking with people, interacting with people, and I think a lot of leaders can relate to that as well. So there's a lot of leaders who extroversion is not their natural preference. They need to kind of get out there and do that. And equally, we can have, really extroverted leaders that find it difficult to set aside that time to think and reflect, or that maybe doesn't come so naturally. What's that balance, do you think, between playing to our strengths or allowing for our strengths and giving people what they need from us? Is there some way of navigating through that and looking after ourselves in the process?
Yeah, to clarify the charismatic introvert comment, I'm one of those people who it's almost like there's a switch. And when I need to step into the space of that charismatic, being on stage, connecting with people, being inspiring, the switch goes on. I go into the room, I meet people, I connect with people. I'm so intentional. But when I go home, it's like, okay, I'm going to go home, cry in the shower, because that was so draining as an experience for me. That's my introvert coming in. And I think for me, it's less about how do I do something that I'm not so great at. And it's more about how do I leverage what I am good at to do something that I hate or that I don't feel like I'm so great at. So let me give you an example. For me, I'm not the huge extrovert. So when I go to, back in the days of conferences, if we had, 5,000 people in a room, I'd feel deeply overwhelmed by that. As a speaker, I can go in, I can talk, I can do all those kinds of things, but to walk around and connect with people, meet new people, walk around in the foyer, say hi, wave to people is so draining for me. And I could sit there and I could say, well, I don't do that. So I'm going to go to a conference. I'm going to hide in the green room. I'm not going to connect with people. I'm just going to avoid people. I'm going to take the executive elevator because I don't like meeting people. And I go, well, I'm losing an opportunity to connect. And so when I stand on stage, I disconnect. And so I go, well, I'm not good at that, so I just won't do it. So instead what I say is, well, what am I good at? And what I would say as, my strengths is I'm a learner. I'm deeply curious. I'm someone who's a thinker. I really love taking conversations and taking them to a really intellectually deep level. I often describe it as taking conversations from the shallow to the deep end. And so I say, well, that's the kind of person that I am. So what do I want to do? I want to connect with people and I want to meet strangers and I want to find new people. So what do? I go in and I go, okay, I'm going to go in as a learner. And I go into big rooms and I go, hey, tell me what brought you here? Hey, what are you excited about? Hey, what have you been learning? And I take the conversation, I use my deep thinking and I take the conversation to a deep place by asking better questions. And someone will say, oh, I've been really wanting to get this out of the conference, but I don't feel like I've got that. And in the back of my mind, I'm going, I just asked someone else that same question. They learned this. And my response is, hey, can I introduce you to such and such? Because I feel like you'll get along really well. So that's my way of approaching something that is not great at me. So if there's people who are out there who are leaders and go, I'm not naturally, the big charismatic speaker. I'm like, that's absolutely okay. What are you? Discover who you are and then just be that. So if you're really great at asking questions, then as a speaker, your job is to ask really good questions and to be able to communicate through by asking really intentional questions. If you are the charismatic person, then lean into those strengths. Don't avoid those things or hide from those things. Just be you, but just be you more intentionally.
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic example. And I think it's a great example of so presenting is not one skill, right? There's dozens of skills in there. And the likelihood is that you're probably pretty good at half of them at least. And so it's grabbing those bits that you're good at. And I love that example of the conference. I had another person who said they've got more, they hated those kind of conference mingling sessions. And look, let's face it, probably most people do. But they approached it as interviewing people. I'm an interviewer. I love interviewing people. I'll just go around and interview people, and that's what they did, and it worked fine for them. So I think that ability to grab a strength, and I know you do work with individuals and teams using more of that sort of strength-based approach. Grabbing those strengths to actually fill some of the holes elsewhere it can be really powerful, rather than feeling like we've got to work on our weaknesses all the time, which can just be debilitating because some of those are really hard to change, but we can often work around them, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's this whole idea of don't focus on what you're bad at. Don't focus on what you lack, focus on what you have. So rather than saying, well, I'm not a good speaker, you go, okay, I'm becoming a better speaker. And so I can talk to my friends and you might realize I'm really good at going out for drinks on a Friday night and having a really good conversation and telling some stories. And you go, well, I'm not a speaker, but I'm a bit of a storyteller. And you go, all right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to leverage my storytelling. I'm going to incorporate that into my speaking. Most people generally have two big issues when it comes to speaking. First issue is they lack confidence and they're not really sure if, they're not the speaker, they're not the kind of speaking type. The other group of people just lack a sense of clarity, which is around how do I make it succinct? How do I make it short? How do I translate all the thoughts that are going into my brain and make it some, kind of coherent process or flow? And I would say for confidence, the way you get better at speaking is practice. That is really the way, just the same way you get better at musical instruments, the same way you get better at running. If you looked at a musical instrument and you say, I don't know how to play the flute, I'm a horrible person, you'd be like, well, have you ever learned the flute? And they're like, well, no. Like, well, if you practice the flute, you could play the flute. And so just practice. The other group of people, which is, I just struggle to get my thoughts out in a coherent sense, they just need a process. They need some kind of framework to capture their thoughts and just to walk it through in a seamless kind of seamless process. So whatever that process is for you, I developed the flight path process in the book with that in mind to go, hey, just do this, 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 and this. It'll feel really clunky at first, but over time it'll become more natural and seamless for you. So whichever those kind of two things people need right now, that's just a really good way forward.
Yeah, it's great, Shane. One of the things that you've got, which I've really enjoyed, is a podcast, which is that Phone Calls with Clever People, and you've had a range of really interesting people. And I think that just for those listening, absolutely check that out, because I think that inquisitiveness that you've got, it seems like you're genuinely learning a lot through that process of speaking with people. Have there been any, as you reflect back on that, have there been any things that you've changed or implemented as a result of just the learning from that diverse range of people that you've had a chance to speak with?
Yeah, that podcast basically speaks to my learner. I am just a learner by nature, and I love having conversations with people. I even feel like, even as we're having this conversation, I feel like I'm learning from you. I would love more than anything right now just to turn this entire conversation on you and get you to share, because I know you, and you're an exceptional thinker. You've got incredible wisdom when it comes to leadership, and so I sit here and go, you're interviewing me, but really want to ask you 1,000 questions right now. And so that's kind of where my podcast came from, which was this Phone Calls with Clever People. Have you ever had that kind of conversation where you pick up the phone, you talk to someone, they just drop all this kind of wisdom and you go, I just wish everyone could have heard that phone call?
Yeah.
That's kind of where it started. And one of the things that I have been, so blown away by from that experience has been, we can talk about one idea of leadership, but it gets split in 1,000 different ways. And everybody has their unique perspective. And so number one, it's taught me to be more curious and to recognize that there is so many perspectives on the one thing that we're looking at. And the second thing it's taught me is there is this flow in conversations that I would say goes from small talk to good talk to real talk. And early on in the podcast, what I found is that it was weighted really heavily around small talk and good talk. We'd go, tell me about yourself, talk to me about what you do. And it would just be the small talk. And then by the end of the podcast, you'd get to that real kind of good talk where it's like, now we're actually talking about things that are helpful. And then you might get a slither of this real talk, which is honest, vulnerable, raw, meaningful, helpful kind of conversation. And that was kind of right at the end. Over the kind of the last year of doing interviews, I'm feeling like the real talk and the good talk is starting to take over the small talk. And what I'd love to do long term is just to eradicate that sense of like, we're just having obligatory small talk. And like, let's dive in and have really meaningful conversations. And so that's translated outside of the podcast to my clients, to the people I work with. I'm like, no, let's not do that small talk stuff. Let's go to the stuff that's helpful for you and let's get to the real place.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, as I've been thinking about structuring these conversations as well, about just diving in. So we could have spent 20 minutes talking about your experience, leading large volunteer kind of groups and all sorts of things that you've done as well. So it does feel like there's always that sense of, oh gosh, I'm underplaying some of your experience, but I think, a lot of that wisdom just comes through in the conversation as well.
I'm so glad you went there.
Yeah, good. Well, that's good. So you've got a new book coming out, which, as we have described, the working title is "I Met a Duck." I think, is that what we're running with?
I'm going to pitch it to my publisher and let you know how it goes.
I don't. It's really no need. But any royalties, just shoot them my way. But the concept around that's really interesting. You're using a kind of a survey and research-driven approach, focusing around middle managers and culture. Just tell me a little bit more about that. You don't have to give away any of I know I think the research just probably landed on your desk a week or two back, so it's probably still swimming around in your head, but it'd be great to just give a sense of, I guess, your hope for that book? What is it that you're trying to address, and what's your hope that book will deliver?
Yeah, I mean, it's been one that's been really exciting for me because it seems like everywhere I go when I have conversations with leaders, more so specifically the people leaders, though middle managers, they're not in the C-suite, they're not on the front line, they're just they're the meat in the sandwich, so to speak. They're right in the middle, and they've got all this influence in the organization in terms of they're leading people every single day, but they often get the least amount of investment. And so when I was talking with them, we would often have conversations around culture, and they would they would say, I know culture is really important. I know culture matters. It's a big part of my role. But what is culture really? And how do you define it? And then more importantly, less than how you define it is how do you actually shape it? And can you shape it? Do you believe you can shape it? And so I knew that this was going to be a really helpful topic for my next book. And if you're going to tackle a beast like culture being such a big conversation, you want to be really thorough in the work. And that was really why I approached McCrindle Research, who are the company that I'm working with and engaged to do this research, because I want to understand what leaders think. I want to know what they think about culture, how they feel about culture, their experience with it, whether or not they believe they can shape it and influence it. And as a bit of a sneak peek, the initial research showed us that around 50% of people, only about 50% of people, think that they can even influence culture, which is such a confronting statistic for me. And so my goal with the book is really to give people a roadmap and a really practical guide to say, hey, number one, you do play a really critical role as a middle manager in shaping your organization's culture. And number two, it's not as confronting and not as overwhelming as you think it might be. It's actually something that you could be doing every single day that's helping design the culture you want. So that's kind of the goal with the book.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we're looking forward. What's the rough timing for that one?
Well, at the moment, it's set for release in April 22. So we're working towards that timeline right now, which means the manuscript's due very, very soon. But we're right in the middle of our research phase. So we just finished stage one of the research. We've gone out to a number of different managers across Australia, actually 1,002 to be very specific. We went to and asked their thoughts on it. And then now we're doing a bunch of in-depth interviews with some of the managers within that survey. And we're going to see what we learn and see what comes out.
Yeah, excellent. Well, look, Shane, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. There's a couple of, I guess, ways that people can connect. Obviously, the podcast, so phone calls with clever people, that's available wherever you get podcasts, like and subscribe, all that kind of stuff. The book is available. You can grab that on Kindle, or you can get physical copies if that's your preference as well. But on top of that, you've got some really interesting programs and things that you run, and I guess groups where you bring people together, and there's we need more of that at the moment. People are feeling really disconnected, and that ability to just get a group of people, a group of leaders together and share some of their challenges and things. So what's the best way to connect with you, and what are some of the key ways that people might engage with you?
Yeah, I mean, the best way to connect with me, I live on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn's kind of where I hang out. It's just it's probably the easiest way to connect with me, or my website, which is just shanemhatton.com. There is, probably the latest thing that's the most helpful thing that I've been doing is this Remarkable Leaders program, which is a 12-month coaching experience with me. And my goal in that was, I was talking to lots of people in different organizations, and they valued being able to be developed within their context. But what they were missing was that external perspective, and they really wanted to connect with leaders doing the similar roles, experiences outside of their organization. So I've pulled together a public group, which is essentially a 12-month experience with a whole bunch of other great leaders, providing that community, helping them feel more confident in their role, and just trying to remove some of that kind of doubt and insecurity that comes with stepping up from being a team member into that people leader role. So there's a whole bunch of information about that on my website as well.
Yeah, fantastic. And I know you generously shared a 10-part series with us, which is up on that Leadership Today app, about making that move from team member to people lead. A lot of wisdom in there, but I think that opportunity to actually connect with others and be coached in a team setting. And I would, for those listening, you get a real sense of Shane's style. This is Shane. This is how he would come across if you're working with him or coaching or having a chat with him on the street. It's a very consistent picture of someone who I think is really quite remarkable and bringing a lot around leadership and influencing. But I'm really excited about that focus, or more intense focus, around culture, because I think it is an area that a lot of people don't fully appreciate the impact, and it can feel like it's just like ingrained in the woodwork and we can't really change it. So yeah, fantastic. I'm looking forward to reading that one as well. I'll buy that copy though. So Shane, it's been great speaking with you today. I really appreciate your time and best wishes for finishing off the book.
Thank you, Andrew. Honestly, I've loved this conversation. I really appreciate you. And I also want to personally give a big plug to the app. I checked it out. You told me about it a few weeks ago and I checked it out, and it's a sensational app. And it's obviously just a deep reflection of who you are, which is just a genius at what you do. So I've really loved having a conversation with you. Thank you.
Join a global community of like-minded leaders, all asking the same question. What can I do today to become an even better leader? Leadership Today allows you to work on your leadership in your own time and at your own pace. Your subscription includes access to all our video-based courses and content covering a wide range of leadership challenges. And there's new research-based practical content added every week. Sign up now for a free 30-day trial. Visit leadership.today for more details.